Basketball is at its core a height-based sport, more than almost any other game. The difference between 6'2" and 6'8" can completely reshape a player's career. Even the guys who are considered short by NBA standards still tower over the average person you'd pass by on the street. And the tallest, most dominant players, they look like they were designed in a lab. Titans who move with the speed and balance of athletes half their size. That's part of the magic of the NBA. Watching these giant athletes do things that don't really look possible for their dimensions. When someone who is 6'10" is spinning like a ballerina, exploding off the floor like a gymnast, and reading the floor like a quarterback, you're reminded that this isn't just a sport, it's also a spectacle. And naturally, the biggest stars in basketball's history almost always come with at least a bit of size that separates them. Michael Jordan at a debatable 6'5", Kobe Bryant at 6'6", and LeBron James at 6'8". These are some of the best players to ever play the game, and it's not just skill that made them stand out. It's how that skill was magnified by their physical profile, which makes for a fun thought experiment. What if you stripped the height away? What if you took one of the greatest players in NBA history and brought him down to the height of an ordinary guard? Not tiny, but only 6'2". So let's start with LeBron James. The real LeBron James is terrifying because of how multiple aspects of his game stack together. He has the basketball IQ of a floor general, the speed and fluidity of a track athlete, and the strength of an NFL linebacker. And then you drop all of that into a 6'8" frame. That's why he's been able to dominate for 2 decades. He sees the game seconds ahead of everyone else, manipulates defenses with surgical precision, and when he decides to attack the rim, there's almost nothing you can do. He can pass over defenders, muscle through contact, and finish contested layups as though they were warm-up drills. But now imagine LeBron without that 6'8" body. Let's shrink him down to 6'2". What changes? Suddenly, he's not a positionless weapon who can guard 5 spots and bulldoze wings. He's a point guard. A very athletic one, but still a point guard in a league that's full of point guards who overperform athletically. And yet his brain doesn't shrink. His instincts, his vision, and his competitive drive are still intact. That's why even at 6'2", LeBron James would still be a problem. He would probably look something like a mix between a few players we know today. People used to call Eric Bledsoe the mini LeBron because he had the stocky build, the explosive first step, and the ability to defend bigger players. And yes, if LeBron were 6'2", he'd definitely share some of those qualities. But where Bledsoe fell short was decision making. His reads weren't really elite, and his game often stalled when the rim wasn't available. LeBron's brain alone would elevate him above that tier immediately. At the same time, there would be flashes of Russell Westbrook in his game. The sheer ferocity, the relentless rim pressure, the willingness to use speed and power to collapse defenses even against taller rim protectors. 6'2" LeBron would be stronger than most guards, faster than most guards, and would outjump most guards. He wouldn't be the freight train plowing through 7-footers, but he'd still be an athletic anomaly at his size. The key difference is how those drives would end. At 6'8", LeBron's finishing is almost unfair. He can extend over defenders, take contact, and still power the ball right in. At 6'2", he wouldn't have that same cushion. He'd have to rely more on craft, finishing before the help arrives, hanging in the air just long enough to slip the ball past a shot blocker, or kicking the ball out when the rim isn't there. The easy points that 6'8" LeBron gets in transition and at the rim would suddenly be harder earned. But what he loses in brute mismatch power, he would make up for with an even greater reliance on playmaking. 6'2" LeBron would be a pick-and-roll savant, controlling games with the ball in his hands on every possession. With his vision, his ability to manipulate defenders with his eyes, and his natural sense of timing, he could pick apart teams possession by possession. In that sense, his career arc might look more like Chris Paul's, a cerebral point guard who dominates with his mind. Except LeBron would do it with more speed, more strength, and a little bit less shooting touch. So he wouldn't be the same all-time great forward, but he wouldn't be some ordinary role player either. He'd fall into a rare mold. part Eric Bledsoe, part Russell Westbrook, part Chris Paul, all wrapped into one. The result would likely be an all-star caliber guard, a floor general who could bully his position and orchestrate an offense at a high level. LeBron James being 6'2" would have still been league-changing, no question. However, his career, his teams, even the way the NBA developed around him would look totally different. And we could spend hours on that. But instead of diving into every hypothetical branch, let's pivot into some fun ones. Because if shrinking LeBron is fascinating, then shrinking or stretching other stars might be even more entertaining. Let's start with Rudy Gobert. The Rudy Gobert we know is a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, a 7-footer who eats space in the paint like a vacuum and shuts down entire game plans just by existing. Now strip that away. Make him 6'2". Suddenly he's not a paint anchoring giant anymore, he's just a lanky dude with questionable hands and no jumper. Put it this way, if 6'2" Rudy Gobert walked into a YMCA, he would probably struggle to hit 25 points, and I'm not being funny or trying to exaggerate. I genuinely don't know what he'd be doing out there. He might still block a few shots against guys who are 5'7", but nobody's building a defense around short Rudy. Let's even give Rudy some credit and say he gets a little better at dribbling and not being as clumsy because he's no longer a giant. I still don't think he even makes a D1 college team. The way he moves around at 7 foot is so stiff and clumsy that even at 6'2", I don't think he magically develops Kyrie's handles or De'Aaron Fox's speed. He might be a slightly above average athlete at best, and he'd still have stone hands. Now, Giannis Antetokounmpo is a different story. At 6'11", he's the ultimate rim runner, slasher, and transition monster. But shrink him down to 6'2", and suddenly he's not dunking over people anymore, he's fighting through them. What survives though is his freakish motor and his defensive instincts. That combination would probably turn him into a ball-hawking, high-energy guard. Picture something like Gary Payton II. A smaller guard who lives in passing lanes, is a surprisingly good dunker, pressures the ball 94 feet, and explodes in transition when given the chance. 6'2" Giannis isn't the Greek freak, but he'd still be a chaos engine, a guy who swings momentum through effort and energy plays. I think successful energy guy off the bench is where 6'2" Giannis caps out. His shooting would be the main problem. He doesn't exactly have that good of a shot at 6'11", although he has been trying to develop it more and more recently. But shrink him down to 6'2" and that shot becomes mediocre at best, if it even changes. Then there's Kevin Durant. 7 feet tall with the handle of a guard and the shot of a pure scorer. That's what makes KD unguardable, but at 6'2", he loses all the matchup nightmare stuff that defines him. What you're left with is a silky scorer, but one that has to beat guys on skill alone without the advantage of shooting over the top of everyone. That sounds an awful lot like Lou Williams, a perennial 6th Man of the Year candidate. The kind of guy who rolls off the bench, gets hot for 20, and completely flips the game on its head. 6'2" Durant would still get buckets. Endlessly, relentlessly, but he'd probably never be the franchise cornerstone. He'd be the microwave scorer you unleash to torture second units. And then there's the flip side of this experiment. What happens if we add a few inches instead of taking them away? Isaiah Thomas is the perfect example for this. At 5'9", he was already an All-NBA guard, putting up nearly 30 points per game at his peak, and dragging Boston deep into the playoffs. Now imagine if he had been 6'2". The same handles, the same shot making, the same fearless attacking mentality, but with just enough height to see and shoot over defenders a bit more cleanly. He probably becomes a perennial all-star. He'd still have that same flair, that same ability to take over games, but with far fewer physical limitations holding him back. Instead of a few great years, Isaiah might have had a decade-long run as one of the league's most dangerous guards. So what's the takeaway here? Basketball is a cruelly height-driven game. For some players like LeBron, those extra 6 inches are the difference between being an all-time legend and just being an all-star guard. For others, like Rudy Gobert, height is literally their career. And for guys like Isaiah Thomas, the lack of it is the only thing that kept them from sitting at the table with the greats. LeBron James was blessed with the mind, the power, and the size, and that's why he became LeBron James. Change one of those ingredients and the whole recipe looks different. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, drop a comment, anything you want to do, we appreciate everything, and we'll see you next video.